The rental car's tires crunched on the gravel drive, the sound disproportionately loud in the stillness. Las Pozos wasn't merely remote, it felt. Held breath. Lena exhaled, mirroring the landscape. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun as she killed the engine, the silence instantly heavier. She'd specifically requested a car that didn't announce its arrival. Now, even that felt foolishly dramatic. She hadn't driven this far to make a statement. She'd driven this far to disappear. The resort itself was low-slung, built from volcanic rock that blended almost seamlessly with the surrounding hills. It wasn't luxurious, not in the way the brochures from the agency had promised. It was worn, dignified even, but definitely past its prime. The paint was faded, the bougainvillea overgrown, and a subtle scent of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic, hung in the air. It was perfect. Lena fished the confirmation email from her phone, the screen brightness jarring in the deepening shadows. Las Pozos Wellness Retreat, a sanctuary for the soul. The irony wasn't lost on her. She needed a sanctuary from herself. A man emerged from the central building, walking with a deliberate, measured pace. Elias. He'd been described as reserved by the agency. That was an understatement. Tall and lean, with silver hair cropped close to his head, he looked more like a retired general than a resort owner. His eyes, the color of flint, flickered over her and her colite, assessing gaze, but offered no warmth. Ms. Harding. His voice was gravelly, the accent unfamiliar, something vaguely Latin American, but with a lilt she couldn't place. Yes, welcome to Las Pozos. He didn't offer to help with her luggage. I trust the drive was uneventful, as much as it could be. Lena kept it vague. Talking about the drive meant talking about leaving Boston, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Not with him. He nodded, understanding, or perhaps simply not caring. I have prepared the Casa Azul for you. It is at the far end of the property, overlooking the lower springs. It offers privacy. Privacy. That was the key. He handed her a heavy antique key. It felt cold in her palm, almost accusing. Mateo will bring your bags up. Dinner is served at 8 in the main house. It is a set menu. I apologize for the lack of choice, but our chef is particular. That is fine. Without another word, Elias turned and disappeared back into the building, leaving Lena standing alone with her luggage and a growing sense of unease. Mateo was everything Elias wasn't, slight of build, perpetually stooped, and radiating an air of quiet sorrow. He didn't meet Lena's eye, simply grunted a greeting as he wrestled her suitcase from the trunk. His hands were calloused and stained with earth. He moved with an economy of motion, as if every gesture was a burden. Gracias, she offered, knowing her Spanish was rudimentary at best. He nodded again, his gaze fixed on the gravel. He carried the suitcase towards one of the smaller casitas, a pale blue structure almost hidden amongst the trees. The air here was thick with the scent of sulfur, a smell Lena found strangely comforting. Neutral, at least. It wasn't the scent of gin. The Casa Azul was sparsely furnished, but clean. A simple bedroom, a small kitchenette, and a living area with a worn sofa and a fireplace. A wide window offered a view of the lower springs, a series of natural pools steaming gently in the cool evening air. It was isolated, exactly as she'd hoped. Lena dropped her bag with a sigh. She needed to unpack to create some semblance of normalcy, but found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. The springs shimmered in the fading light, looking both inviting and ominous. She pulled out her phone, checking for a signal. Nothing. She hadn't expected one. She'd deliberately chosen a place that was off grid. She had to stay focused. 28 days. 28 days of clean air, mineral water, and enforced solitude. 28 days to rebuild. She splashed water on her face, trying to wash away the exhaustion and the lingering tremor of anxiety. Her hands shook less now, but the phantom taste of juniper still clung to her tongue. Don't think about it. The memory, unbidden and brutal, surfaced nonetheless, a shattered glass on the polished wood floor. Her boss's face contorted with disappointment. The hollow ache of shame. The phone call to her sister, Sarah, the one she hadn't returned. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back the tears. She'd promised Sarah. She'd sworn this was the last time. But promises, she'd learned, were fragile things, like glass, like sobriety. Lena forced herself to unpack, laying out her clothes in the small wardrobe. Mostly practical, neutral colors, no bright hues to attract attention. She'd brought a stack of books, sketching pads, and a journal, tools for distraction. Dinner was silent. Elias presided over the table with an air of distant authority. There were only two other guests, a pale, gaunt man who barely touched his food, and a young woman engrossed in a book. No one spoke. The chef, a stout woman with a permanent scowl, served a bland vegetable stew. Lena picked at it, her appetite non-existent. After dinner, she retreated to her casita, seeking the false comfort of solitude. She poured a glass of sparkling water, the bubbles a poor substitute for the burn of gin. She sat on the veranda, listening to the chirping of crickets and the faint gurgle of the springs. The springs, she'd read about them. Legends of healing waters, sacred to the indigenous people who had once inhabited the area. Stories of miraculous recoveries and of unexplained disappearances. She shivered, despite the warm air. The next morning, Lena woke before dawn, a strange restlessness stirring within her. She hadn't slept well, plagued by fragmented dreams of Boston, of faces she couldn't quite place, of a relentless, suffocating darkness. She made coffee, the bitter aroma filling the casita, and walked towards the lower springs. The air was cool and damp, the mist rising from the water like ghostly apparitions. The springs were arranged in a series of natural terraces, each pool fed by a different vein of mineral, rich water. The water itself was a startling shade of turquoise, almost otherworldly. The surrounding rocks were covered in a velvety moss, and the air hummed with an almost palpable energy. She found a secluded pool, tucked away behind a cluster of ferns. It was smaller than the others, more intimate. She slipped into the warm water, letting the minerals seep into her aching muscles. It was soothing, almost hypnotic. She closed her eyes, trying to empty her mind, but the memories persisted, swirling like eddies in the water. The frantic phone calls, the missed deadlines, the growing sense of desperation. The accident. It had been a stupid mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment, a single drink to calm her nerves. One drink had led to another and another until she'd found herself spiraling out of control. The gallery opening, the culmination of months of work, had been a disaster. She'd shown up late, slurring her words, her hands shaking so badly she'd nearly dropped a sculpture. Her mentor, old Manwaring, had been there. The disappointment in his eyes had been more devastating than any reprimand. And then the car, the rain, the blinding headlights, the sickening crunch of metal. She hadn't been hurt, not physically, but the other driver, she hadn't been drinking that much. It wasn't enough, too. She squeezed her eyes shut, a wave of nausea washing over her. She couldn't think about it. She wouldn't. She focused on the sensation of the warm water, the cool air on her skin, the sound of the birdsong. She tried to visualize a blank canvas, a clean slate. She willed herself to be present, to be grounded, but the undercurrent of anxiety remained, a persistent tremor beneath the surface. She opened her eyes and noticed something half buried in the mud at the bottom of the pool. A glint of silver. Curiosity piqued. She reached down and retrieved it. It was a locket, tarnished with age and encrusted with mud. It was heart-shaped, delicate, and surprisingly heavy. She fumbled with the clasp, her fingers clumsy with cold. It sprung open, revealing 2 miniature portraits. A young woman with dark hair and luminous eyes stared back at her, her expression both hopeful and haunted. Alongside her was a faded image of a man, his features indistinct. On the back of the locket, etched in delicate script, was a single date, the 12th of October, 1988, and a name, Isabel. A chill ran down Lena's spine. She'd heard whispers from Mateo during the brief moments he'd been near her. Stories of a young woman who'd vanished from Las Pozos over 30 years ago. Isabel, a guest, like her, seeking solace. She'd simply walked away one evening and was never seen again. Lena stared at the photograph, her heart pounding in her chest. The young woman's eyes seemed to follow her, pleading, accusing. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the edge of the pool, struggling to maintain her balance. The water around her suddenly felt cold, dark, and she had a terrifying certainty that she had just stumbled upon a secret that someone wanted to remain buried. The locket felt heavy in Lena's palm, a cold weight against her skin. She spent the morning tracing the delicate curves of its heart shape, the faded image of Isabel a constant, unsettling presence. She couldn't shake the feeling that the young woman was trying to tell her something. She found Elias in the main house, meticulously polishing a silver tray. He didn't look up when she entered. "Excuse me," she said, her voice hesitant. "I was wondering if you could tell me something about the history of this place." He continued polishing, his movements precise and economical. "Las Pozos has been a place of respite for many years, a place to find peace. I understand that, but I was hoping for something more specific. I found something, a locket with a name, Isabel." Elias finally looked up, his flinty eyes assessing her. "A locket, interesting. People lose things. This isn't just a lost item. The name, Isabel Jenkins. Did you know her?" He paused, his polishing cloth still. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed his face. "That was a long time ago, before my time. But you've heard of her. There have been rumors over the years, a young woman who disappeared, a tragic incident." He dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "The local police investigated. It was a cold case, nothing more. The police never found her. No, she simply vanished." He resumed polishing, effectively ending the conversation. "Las Pozos has a history, yes, but it is a history best left undisturbed." Lena pressed on. "I've heard this place has a reputation. Stories about the springs." Elias's grip on the tray tightened. "Superstition, old wives' tales. The local tribes considered the springs sacred, yes, but that was centuries ago. It means nothing now." She suspected he was lying, or at least omitting crucial details, but he was a fortress of reserve, and she doubted she could breach his defenses. "Thank you for your time," she said, turning to leave. "Enjoy your stay, Miss Harding, and try to relax." The last sentence felt less like a kindness and more like a warning. The local library was a small, dusty room above the general store. The librarian, a kindly woman with a cascade of silver hair, directed Lena to the microfiche archive. Hours blurred as Lena scanned old newspaper articles. Isabel Jenkins. The name leapt out from the yellowed pages. Sarah Jenkins, it turned out, was a graduate student from Boston, visiting Las Pozos on a scholarship to study local folklore. She'd been engaged to a man named Daniel Hayes. Her disappearance in October 1988 had been front page news. The articles detailed a frantic search involving local authorities and even the FBI. There were interviews with her distraught parents, her friends, Daniel Hayes. The Hayes man had appeared devastated, pleading for Sarah's safe return. But the articles also noted inconsistencies in his statements. He changed his story several times, and there were reports of arguments between the couple in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The coverage dwindled after a month, replaced by other news. The case went cold, unsolved, forgotten, except, clearly, it hadn't been forgotten by everyone. Lena spent the rest of the afternoon piecing together fragments of information. She learned the springs weren't just considered sacred by the ancient tribes. They were also feared. Legends spoke of a water spirit, a capricious entity that demanded sacrifices. Some believed that the springs were a portal to another world. She also discovered a series of anonymous tips received by the police during the initial investigation. One claimed that a small, secretive group had been meeting on the grounds of Las Pozos, conducting strange rituals. Another spoke of a dark energy emanating from the springs. These leads were dismissed as the ramblings of cranks and conspiracy theorists, but they lingered in the margins of the newspaper reports, casting a disturbing shadow over the case. The next morning, driven by an unsettling compulsion, Lena sought out Ben Romero. She'd learned he was the sheriff who'd led the investigation into Sarah Jenkins' disappearance. He was retired now, living in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. His property was cluttered with farm equipment and stray dogs. Romero himself was a weathered man, his face etched with the lines of hard living. He regarded her with suspicion. "I heard you were the sheriff on the Jenkins case," Lena said, after a brief exchange of pleasantries. Romero's eyes narrowed. "That was a long time ago. A bad memory." He gestured towards a rickety porch swing. "Have a seat." He was reluctant to talk, but Lena persevered, showing him a copy of the photograph from the Locket. "I found this at the resort. Do you recognize her?" Romero's gaze softened as he looked at the picture. Sarah, poor girl. "Never did find out what happened to her," he sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Daniel Hayes, that was a piece of work. Claimed he last saw her going for a walk near the springs. Said they'd had a fight. She needed some space." Was he considered a suspect? He was the prime suspect. All right, plenty of motive. Jealous, controlling. He wasn't happy about her research, thought she was getting too involved with the local folklore. And those inconsistencies in his story, they didn't add up. What happened to him? Romero frowned. He vanished. A week after she did, just packed up and left. Sold everything. The authorities looked for him, but he was gone. Clean off the grid. Did he leave a note? Romero hesitated. He did. A short one. Said something about the water's claim. Said he couldn't fight it anymore. He shook his head. Cryptic nonsense. We figured he was trying to throw us off. Or maybe he knew more than he let on. "The water's claim," Lena repeated, a chill crawling up her spine. "Old-timers talk, superstition. They say the springs have a way of taking what they want." He chuckled mirthlessly. "I didn't put much stock in it then, and I don't now. But it is a damn strange place, Las Pozos. Always has been." He spoke of rumors circulating at the time, thin whispers of a cult operating in the area, drawn to the springs by their purported mystical properties. He admitted that the FBI had investigated these leads, but found nothing concrete. However, he also confessed that the investigation had been hampered by the resort owner at the time, a man named Ricardo Vargas. Vargas was uncooperative. He didn't want any unwanted attention. He shut down a lot of avenues of inquiry. Said he wanted to protect the reputation of the resort. Lena felt a knot forming in her stomach. Elias, the current owner, had seemed equally determined to downplay the resort's history. As she drove back to Las Pozos, the landscape seemed to press in around her, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes. She found herself increasingly aware of the sounds of the resort, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects, the distant gurgle of the springs. Sounds that had once been soothing now felt ominous, as if she were being watched. That night, the nightmares started. Vivid, disturbing dreams of drowning in dark, swirling water. She saw Sarah Jenkins' face, contorted with terror, reaching out to her for help. She heard a voice whispering her name, beckoning her closer to the springs. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness of the casita felt suffocating, oppressive. She got out of bed and walked to the window, staring out at the springs. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the water, making it look like a pool of molten silver. She could almost feel a pull, a magnetic force drawing her towards it. She shivered despite the warm air. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition of something terrible about to happen. She went to the springs, driven by an irresistible impulse. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur, and the silence was absolute. She stood at the edge of the pool, mesmerized by the shimmering water. A branch snapped behind her. She whirled around, but there was nothing there. She told herself it was her imagination, fueled by stress and lack of sleep. But the feeling of being watched persisted. She reached out and touched the water, testing its temperature. It was surprisingly warm, almost alive. As she did so, she felt a strange tingling sensation in her fingers, a faint electrical current running through her veins. And then she heard it, a whisper. So faint she almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind. "Isabel," Lena gasped, pulling her hand back. She scanned the surrounding darkness, but saw nothing. Was she losing her mind? Was the weight of her past, coupled with the unsettling history of Las Pozos, finally pushing her over the edge? Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the trees, stirring up the leaves and sending ripples across the surface of the water. And for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a face staring back at her from the depths, a pale, haunting face with dark, luminous eyes. The face of Isabel Jenkins. Back in the casita, unable to sleep, she obsessively reread the old newspaper articles, tracing the lines of Sarah's face in the grainy photographs. She noticed something she'd missed before. In one of the photos taken during a resort event, Sarah was standing near Elias. He was much younger then, but it was undeniably him, and he wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking away from her, his expression carefully neutral, as if he was hiding something. Lena's breathing hitched. The water's claim echoed in her mind. She clutched the locket, its cold metal a stark reminder of the mystery she'd stumbled into. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that the secrets of Las Pozos were far darker and more dangerous than she could have imagined, and she was beginning to suspect that she'd walked into a trap. The drive to Tierra Amarilla was a winding ascent through rugged hills, the landscape stark and unforgiving. Ben Romero did most of the talking, filling the silence with local lore and cautionary tales. Lena listened, mostly offering polite nods and the occasional question. She felt oddly detached, as if observing her own life from a distance. The weight of the locket in her pocket was a constant, grounding presence. Daniel Vance wasn't a popular man, Romero said, his voice gravelly. Kept to himself mostly, always had his nose in a book. And those books, they weren't the kind most folks around here would be caught dead reading. Tierra Amarilla was a sleepy town, time seeming to have bypassed it altogether. The main street consisted of a handful of weathered shops and a dusty cantina. They started their inquiries at the local diner, a greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and a clientele of grizzled ranchers and weary travelers. Daniel Vance, the waitress, a woman named Maria, repeated, wiping down the counter with a stained rag. Oh, him, he was a strange one. Came in here sometimes, always scribbling in a notebook. Talked a lot about energy and the springs, said they had special powers. Did he mention Sarah Jenkins? Lena asked. Maria frowned. Sarah was nice, always smiling. She didn't seem to fit with him. He was intense, always talking about finding enlightenment. Joined a few groups, I think. Romero interjected. He was involved with a group called the Children of the Sun, bunch of hippies who believed the springs were a sacred place, a portal to another dimension. They had some pretty wild ideas. Their next lead came from Old Man Tiberio, a retired mechanic who remembered Vance from his time running errands for him. He was fascinated with the local legends, Tiberio rasped, his voice like sandpaper. The Native American tales about the springs. He'd asked me about them, trying to piece things together, said he was, unlocking their secrets. Did he seem unstable? Lena asked, carefully. Tiberio hesitated. Towards the end. Yeah, he was getting jumpy, said he was being watched, mumbling to himself. He always had a strange look in his eyes. But it got worse. Wild. Like he was seeing things. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a disturbing picture. Daniel Vance wasn't simply a jealous fiancé. He was a man consumed by obsession, struggling with his own inner demons. And the springs, it seemed, were at the center of it all. He left town shortly after Sarah disappeared, Romero said, as they drove away from Tierra Amarilla. Sold everything he owned. Vanished without a trace. They followed a dusty track leading into the foothills, eventually reaching a dilapidated cabin hidden amongst the trees. It had been abandoned for years, falling into disrepair. The roof sagged, the windows were broken, and the paint was peeling. This was his place, Romero said, stepping out of the truck. We searched it thoroughly at the time, but it wasn't much to go on. The cabin was a single room, sparsely furnished with a rickety table, a broken chair, and a rusty cot. Dust lay thick on every surface. The air was stale and musty, smelling of decay. Lena cautiously entered, her senses on high alert. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. She ran a gloved hand over the table, sending a cloud of dust swirling into the air. Look at this, Romero said, pointing to a pile of notebooks stacked in a corner. Vance's journals. We confiscated them, but they were mostly filled with rambling nonsense, religious ramblings, local law, and obsessive drawings of the springs. Lena began to sift through the notebooks, her heart pounding in her chest. Page after page was filled with intricate sketches of the hot springs, annotated with cryptic symbols and nonsensical phrases. Vance's handwriting became progressively more erratic, the lines shaky and uneven. As she flipped through the pages, she came across a series of disturbing drawings. They depicted shadowy figures lurking amongst the trees, watching the springs. One sketch showed a figure resembling a person being pulled beneath the surface of the water, and then she found it, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, carefully concealed from view. A small wooden box. Romero pried open the box, revealing a collection of sketches bound together with twine. These drawings were different from the others. They were darker, more disturbing. They depicted the springs in a sinister light, the water appearing black and viscous. And in the foreground of each drawing was a shadowy figure, watching from the trees. A figure that, Lena realized with a jolt, bore a striking resemblance to Elias. What is it? Romero asked, noticing her stunned expression. Lena couldn't speak. She simply handed him the sketches, her hand trembling. Romero's face darkened as he examined the drawings. This is unsettling. He knew something, Lena finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. He wasn't acting alone. Someone else was involved. The implications were terrifying. The idyllic façade of Las Pozos was crumbling, revealing a darker, more sinister reality. Back at the casita, Lena felt a tightness in her chest, a familiar craving gnawing at her insides. She hadn't felt this way in weeks. The stress of the investigation, the unsettling discoveries, the lingering trauma of her past fooding. It was all colliding, threatening to overwhelm her. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water, but it didn't offer the same solace it once had. The urge for something stronger, something to numb the pain, was almost unbearable. She paced the room, fighting the rising panic. She knew what would happen if she gave in. One drink would lead to another, and she'd be back where she started, lost in the darkness. She grabbed her journal, desperate for a distraction. She began to sketch, furiously scribbling lines on the page, trying to channel her anxiety into something creative. But the images that emerged were dark and disturbing, mirroring the unsettling drawings she'd found in Vance's cabin. She slammed the journal shut, disgusted with herself. She couldn't control it. The darkness was creeping back in. She needed to talk to someone, to Sarah, but she hadn't spoken to her sister in months, not since the incident. She'd been too ashamed, too afraid. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then dialed Sarah's number. It rang and rang, but there was no answer. She left a voicemail, her voice shaky and uncertain. "Sarah, it is me. I just wanted to check in. I'm okay. I'm just dealing with some stuff." She paused, struggling to find the words. "I think I need your help." She hung up the phone, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. She'd promised herself she'd get better. She'd promised Sarah she'd stay sober. But now, she wasn't sure if she could keep that promise. She stared out the window at the springs, their shimmering surface beckoning her. The call of the water was growing stronger, more seductive. She took a deep breath, trying to regain control. She knew what she had to do. She had to stay focused. She had to uncover the truth about Sarah Jenkins. She had to protect herself. But as she stood there, staring into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far more dangerous than she could imagine, and that the water, as Daniel Vance had claimed, was about to claim her too. The call came just before dawn. Elias's voice, devoid of its usual glacial composure, crackled over the phone line. "Mr. Reeves is missing." Lena bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Arthur Reeves, a quiet, solitary man in his late 50s, a writer seeking refuge at Las Pozos. She'd barely spoken to him, only exchanging polite nods during dinner. "Missing," she repeated, her voice hoarse. "What do you mean?" "He didn't return to his casita last night. His bed was untouched. We've searched the grounds, but there is no sign of him." A cold dread washed over Lena. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She knew with a sickening certainty that this wasn't a simple disappearance. It was a repetition, a horrifying echo of Sarah Jenkins. "When was the last time anyone saw him?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to maintain control. "Around 10 o'clock, he was taking a final soak in the lower springs. Mateo saw him. The lower springs, the same springs where Sarah Jenkins had vanished, the same springs that seemed to exert a magnetic, malevolent pull. "I'm coming," Lena said, cutting the call. The scene at the lower springs was eerily familiar. Mateo, his face etched with worry, stood silently near the pool, where Arthur had last been seen. Ben Romero arrived shortly after, his expression grim. "Same as before," he muttered, surveying the area. "No forced entry, no obvious signs of foul play, just gone." But Lena noticed something Romero didn't. A scattering of disturbed earth near the edge of the pool, a broken twig, a faint, almost imperceptible drag mark in the mud. "Look," she said, pointing to the ground. There was a struggle here. Romero knelt down, examining the evidence. "You're right, something happened here." He straightened up, his jaw tight. "But what?" They searched the surrounding area, but found nothing else. No personal belongings, no footprints, no clues. It was as if Arthur Reeves had simply vanished into thin air. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She scanned the trees, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was broken only by the gurgling of the springs. "This is too much of a coincidence," she said, her voice strained. "Two people disappearing from the same place, under the same circumstances. Something is going on here." Romero nodded grimly. "I agree, and I don't like it one bit." They returned to the main house, where Elias was attempting to maintain a semblance of control. He was pacing back and forth in his office, his face pale with anxiety. "This is a disaster," he said, without greeting. "The reputation of Las Pozos, it is ruined." "Where were you last night, Mr. Vargas?" Lena asked, her voice sharp. He stopped pacing and glared at her. "I was in my office, working. I told you I am always working. Can anyone corroborate that? Does it matter?" "This is a tragedy, Miss Harding, not a criminal investigation." "It is a criminal investigation," Romero interjected, his voice steely, "and we're going to treat it as such. Tell me, has anything else unusual happened here lately? Any strange visitors? Any complaints from guests?" Elias hesitated. "No, nothing." Lena fixed him with a piercing gaze. "You're lying. You know something. What are you hiding?" He remained silent, his expression inscrutable. "I have nothing to say." Lena felt a surge of frustration. She knew he was protecting something, shielding the resort from scrutiny. But what? And why? "You're complicit in this," she accused, her voice trembling with anger. "You're covering something up." Driven by desperation, Lena decided to take matters into her own hands. She remembered Mateo mentioning a network of underground tunnels beneath the springs, remnants of an old mining operation. Rumors persisted that the tunnels had been used for other, more clandestine purposes. "Where do the tunnels lead?" she asked Mateo. Cornering him near the maintenance shed, he looked at her warily, his eyes darting around as if he feared being overheard. "They are old, dangerous, best left alone." "I need to know," Lena insisted. "Arthur Reeves disappeared last night. Sarah Jenkins disappeared years ago. Something is happening here, Mateo, and I think those tunnels have something to do with it." He hesitated, then sighed, relenting. "There is an entrance near the upper springs, but I warn you, Citurita, it is not a safe place." Following Mateo's directions, Lena found a hidden alcove concealed behind a waterfall. A narrow opening led into darkness. Armed with a flashlight, she descended into the tunnels. The air was damp and cold, and the walls were slick with moisture. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, forcing her to stoop as she walked. The silence was broken only by the dripping of water and the echo of her own footsteps. She followed the winding passage for what seemed like an eternity, the darkness pressing in around her. Finally, she reached a large cavern, and what she found inside sent a shiver down her spine. The cavern had been converted into a makeshift chamber. Stone altars were arranged in a circle, and the walls were covered in disturbing symbols, mirroring those she'd seen in Daniel Vance's sketches. A pungent smell hung in the air, a mixture of incense, decay, and something else she couldn't quite identify. In the center of the chamber, she found a metal chest. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, nestled amongst faded velvet lining, identical to the one she'd found in the spring. And then she saw something that made her blood run cold. A collection of recent photographs of Arthur Reeves, photographs taken just days before his disappearance, and alongside the photographs, a series of sketches. The same disturbing images of the springs, the same shadowy figure lurking amongst the trees, but this time the figure wasn't shadowy. It was clearly visible. It was Elias. The photographs felt like ice in Lena's hands. Elias watching Arthur. Photographing him, the implication was undeniable. He hadn't been trying to protect the resort's reputation. He'd been orchestrating a cover-up. She had to find Mateo. She retraced her steps through the tunnels, emerging into the cool night air, her mind racing. Mateo hadn't seemed surprised by her interest in the tunnels. Merely resigned. Now she understood why. He knew He'd always known. She found him tending to the gardens, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look up when she approached. "You knew, didn't you?" she said, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "You knew what was happening here." Matteo sighed, finally raising his head. His face was etched with sorrow. "I tried to warn them. Both of them. Warn them about what? About the guardians, about the power of the springs, about the dangers of seeking what lies beneath the surface." He led her to a small weathered shrine hidden amongst the bougainvillea. It was adorned with stones, feathers, and small offerings. "My family has been caretakers of these lands for generations. We are descendants of the original people who lived here. We understand the springs. We know their secrets," he explained. That the springs weren't merely a geological phenomenon. They were a nexus of energy, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. For centuries, the local tribes had revered the springs, believing they possessed the power to heal, to enlighten, or to destroy. Over time, Matteo continued, a group formed. They called themselves the Children of the Sun. They believed they could harness the spring's power, unlock its secrets. They began to conduct rituals, seeking to commune with the spirits. "And Elias was involved?" Lena asked, already knowing the answer. He was a young man then, easily influenced. His family had lost their land during a drought. He saw the group as a way to restore his family's fortune, to gain power and control. He became their zealous protector. The Children of the Sun weren't seeking enlightenment. Lena realized they were seeking control. They believed they were entitled to the spring's power, and they would stop at nothing to protect it. "Sarah Jenkins," Lena prompted. "What happened to her?" Matteo's eyes filled with pain. She was a curious woman. She began to ask questions. She discovered their rituals. She threatened to expose them. They couldn't allow that. Elias, he helped them silence her. And Arthur Reeves, he was a writer. He sensed something was wrong. He started digging around, asking questions. He was getting too close. They silenced him too. The truth settled over Lena like a shroud. 2 lives extinguished, sacrificed to protect a twisted ideology and a dangerous secret. "They made it look like accidents," Matteo said, his voice barely a whisper. "They've been doing this for years, covering up their crimes, protecting their secrets." Lena felt a wave of nausea rise within her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to destroy everything in her path. But she knew she had to remain focused. She had to bring them to justice. But a different kind of darkness was stirring within her too, a familiar ache, a desperate craving. She hadn't touched a drink in weeks, but the urge was overwhelming. The stress, the horror, the betrayal softened. It was all too much. She closed her eyes, fighting the urge. She thought of Sarah, of Arthur, of the lives they'd lost. She thought of her sister, of the promise she'd made. She couldn't give in. Not now, not ever. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to go to the police," she said to Matteo. "We need to tell them everything." "They won't believe us," Matteo said, shaking his head. "The Children of the Sun have deep roots. They have connections. They'll discredit us, make us look like crazy conspiracy theorists. We have to try." But before they could leave, a voice cut through the night air. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Elias stood at the entrance to the shrine, his face contorted with anger. He held a heavy wrench in his hand, the metal gleaming in the moonlight. "You've been snooping around where you don't belong, Miss Harding," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You've uncovered secrets that were meant to stay buried." "It is over, Elias," Lena said, her voice trembling but firm. "The police are on their way." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "The police won't be coming. I made sure of that." He gestured behind him, and 2 shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, members of the Children of the Sun, loyal to Elias, devoted to protecting the spring's secrets. You've become a threat, Miss Harding, Elias said, advancing towards her. A loose end that needs to be tied up for the good of Las Pozos, for the good of the Springs. You're a murderer, Lena spat. I am a protector, he countered, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. I am safeguarding something sacred. Mateo stepped forward, attempting to intervene. Elias, don't do this. It is not worth it. Elias shoved Mateo aside, sending him sprawling to the ground. You've always been weak, Mateo. Too soft. You failed to protect what is important. Lena backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trapped, cornered. She glanced around desperately, searching for an escape route. But there was nowhere to run. The tunnels were narrow and winding, and Elias and his followers were blocking the exits. She knew she couldn't fight them. She wasn't strong enough, but she wasn't going to go down without a fight. She remembered the locket in her pocket, a symbol of the past, a testament to the lives that had been lost. She clutched it tightly, drawing strength from its cold metal. Elias lunged at her, raising the wrench above his head. It is time to silence you, Miss Harding, he said, his voice dripping with malice. It is time to return you to the water's embrace. The wrench whistled through the air, aimed at the side of Lena's head. Instinct took over. She ducked, the metal connecting with a sickening thud against the stone wall. Pain flared in her shoulder as she stumbled backward, slamming into the altar. Elias roared, swinging again. Lena dodged, her mind racing. She couldn't overpower him. He was bigger, stronger. She had to use her head. She'd spent years studying human behavior, analyzing motivations, understanding the subtle nuances of manipulation. It was time to put that knowledge to use. You think you're protecting something sacred, don't you? She yelled, her voice echoing through the cavern. But all you're protecting is your own power. Your own delusion. Elias paused, momentarily thrown off balance. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a control freak, Elias. You lost your land, your status, your sense of self-worth. And you found a way to rebuild it by exploiting the fears and vulnerabilities of others, by manipulating them into believing your lies. She pushed further, targeting his insecurities. The children of the sun. They're just pawns in your game. You've twisted their beliefs, used their faith to justify your own twisted desires. His face contorted with rage. He advanced on her again, but his movements were less precise, fueled more by anger than strategy. Lena used his momentum against him, sidestepping and delivering a sharp elbow to his ribs. It wasn't much, but it was enough to momentarily stun him. You think you can break me with your words, he growled, clutching his side. I think I can expose you for what you are, she replied, her voice unwavering. A coward hiding behind a façade of spirituality. Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows. Mateo, his face bruised and bleeding, launched himself at Elias, tackling him to the ground. A chaotic brawl erupted, the two men grappling for control. Lena used the distraction to back away, fumbling for her phone. No signal, of course. She scanned the cavern, desperate for a way to contact the authorities. Then she remembered the emergency beacon in the main house. Mateo, she shouted. The beacon. We need to get to the beacon. Mateo managed to break free from Elias's grasp, shoving him against the altar. Go, I'll hold him. Lena didn't hesitate. She sprinted through the tunnels, her lungs burning, her legs aching. She burst into the main house, bypassing the stunned reception staff, and raced to Elias's office. She activated the beacon, praying that someone would hear it. Within minutes, the wail of sirens echoed in the distance. When the police arrived, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Elias and Mateo were both in custody, and the children of the sun were rounded up and questioned. A search of the tunnels revealed a hidden cell, concealed behind a false wall, and inside, bound and gagged, was Arthur Reeves. He was weak and dehydrated, but alive. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, media attention, and legal proceedings. The truth about Las Pozos finally came to light, shocking the local community and beyond. The children of the sun were exposed as a dangerous cult, their beliefs rooted in delusion and their actions fueled by greed and power. Elias, the charismatic leader, faced a slew of charges, including kidnapping, assault, and accessory to murder. Mateo, despite his complicity, was granted leniency in exchange for his cooperation. He expressed deep remorse for his actions, claiming he'd been manipulated by Elias and blinded by faith. Arthur Reeves, after receiving medical attention, recounted his ordeal, confirming Lena's suspicions about Elias's involvement. The stories of Sarah Jenkins' disappearance were revisited, her parents finally receiving a measure of closure after decades of uncertainty. The resort, once a haven of tranquility, was shut down pending investigation. Its dark history, its hidden secrets, were finally exposed. In the aftermath, Lena found herself drawn back to the springs, not with fear or apprehension, but with a sense of peace. She sat by the water's edge, watching the steam rise and dissipate into the air. She'd called Sarah. The conversation had been difficult, filled with apologies and tears, but they'd connected, re-established a bond that had been strained by Lena's past mistakes. Sarah had promised to be there for her to support her on her journey to recovery. She'd also started attending AA meetings, sharing her story with others who understood her struggles. It wasn't easy, but it was a necessary step. She'd finally accepted that she couldn't outrun her demons. She had to face them, confront them, and learn to live with them. She thought about Mateo, about his family's connection to the springs. She understood now that the water wasn't inherently evil. It was a force of nature, a source of power that could be used for good or for ill. It was up to humans to choose. She dipped her hand into the water, feeling its warmth on her skin. This time, there was no tingling sensation, no whisper in the darkness, just a quiet stillness. She had faced her darkness, and she had survived. She had uncovered the truth, and she had brought a measure of justice to those who had been wronged. She was still vulnerable, still fragile. But she was also strong. She was resilient. She was finally free. As she prepared to leave Las Pozos, she stood one last time by the springs, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. She noticed something different, a subtle ripple on the surface of the pool, a shimmer that wasn't caused by the wind. She stared at the water, her heart pounding in her chest. A sense of unease washed over her. The springs were silent, still, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching her, listening, and she sensed with a chilling certainty that their influence was far from over. The weight of the water, the keeper of secrets, remained.